item 8.3, if you could move up there on the screen, thank you. Yep. The Chief Executive and the Chief Financial Officer's report, and I welcome both the Chief Executive and the Chief Financial Officer to the stage.
Kia ora koutou. Nice to be with you again this month, and as per normal I'll cover a few things followed by Ross, and then very happy to take some questions. The Mayor said earlier that this section seems to take anywhere between 30 minutes and 3 hours, so just to foreshadow, I'm choosing 30 minutes. But
it's not up to you.
Yeah, well, I thought that was a nice oblique way of making a point. I'll just start by acknowledging that we've finished the financial year and entering reporting season. So there are, I won't spend a lot of time sort of summarising the last year and where things were at, because you've got things, you've got quarterly and annual report material coming through the Budget and Performance Committee, value for money shortly. I do acknowledge, though, that I reported to the Appointments and Performance Review Committee last week and summarised things. To foreshadow, I'm circulating a summary of that. This goes to the scorecard that I formally agree with you on an annual basis, and so there's a summary of performance coming your way. Suffice to say that I'm pretty pleased with where things ended up in terms of financial end of year result, in terms of progress against the strategic priorities and various aspects of reform that you set out for me and for the organisation, and so forth. So I will leave all other general updates. Maybe other than to say, as I've reflected on previously, that the context has been interesting in the last year in terms of the extent of change in the organisation. Obviously the transport reform, but before that other changes that materially affected Tātaki and Eke Panuku. The organisation's in pretty good heart as we understand it, from things like staff engagement, levels of turnover being lower, or engagement being higher, and staff turnover being lower than it's been for very many years. And we're making good progress in a whole range of other reform issues, including things like increasingly bringing stuff into a digital environment. You'll be interested perhaps to know that the number of digital transactions for the organisation in the last year exceeded 1.2 million. And a very significant proportion of things that we can transact through a digital medium. There's a real trajectory there. I acknowledge in the report, which I refer you to, a list of legislative changes that's pretty fulsomely covered off there. So I won't talk to that, other than to acknowledge two or three things. That the Local Government Systems Amendment Bill had its second reading. This is not currently in there, but this is where you need to look for an understanding of whether changes to the Haukura arrangement will happen. So we're keeping a close eye on that because of its impact on them and therefore us in terms of decision making. The Building Amendment Act had its first reading. This is really critical because it will help us address the joint and several liability, proportionate liability question, and a regime around building warranties. This will have a very material effect on our risk and liability profile going forward if it progresses as it was originally set out. So it's on the pathway now. I think I'm looking across at a previous minister with some responsibility in that area. And then finally, just to acknowledge that the planning and natural environment bills, i.e. the changes to the Resource Management Act area, had their second reading in late July. So quite a lot in that environment that we're keeping an eye on, and consequently there have been and there will be more submissions requiring to input to that process to influence where we can. I acknowledge, I wanted to talk to the savings challenge that exists in this year's budget at a high level, which is to make you aware that I will bring through reports shortly that identify where we need to look in the organisation in terms of addressing that savings challenge. We're positively able to carry forward into this year a number of savings initiatives that we succeeded with last year. So in terms of the 106 million specific target in the annual plan, there's about 50 million of it that we're carrying forward. So still a quite significant body of work required to solve for that savings challenge in the next year, and there'll be reports through value for money and otherwise to you. You need to know, I think, that we've allocated out savings targets to general managers through the organisation. They typically have somewhere between 1% and 4% of their operating budgets needing to be savings needing to be identified in that sort of proportion. Obviously, the guidance is to look at aspects of cost containment that don't have direct and observable impacts on service levels, not felt by the community, which means that we necessarily need to look at back office and support stuff and other ways of doing things that the public isn't going to experience in a negative way. To the extent that that things do have an impact, an observable impact in terms of service levels, of course that needs to be transparent and will be reported back to you. A couple of slightly random matters. This week we Haukura moved into new offices further down towards the Spark Arena in Mahuhu Crescent. So that's been a while coming. So, and I just want to be on the public record as thanking them for their cooperation and goodwill in terms of making that move. There is a quite material cost saving moving out of the offices down at the viaduct through to this new office accommodation, which is very nice and fit for purpose, but also somewhat more cost effective than the previous office. So acknowledgement to Chair David and Haukura for working with us on that. The implementation of some AI-enabled reporting of problems for the community is going well, and we're going to be increasingly expanding the scope of that in terms of the number of things that can be reported through that mechanism. It's fairly recent, but has already gone through 10,000 users of that, so it's picking up traction in a really positive way. A couple of other things I wanted to acknowledge the folk involved with the Māori Outcomes Fund, political support for sure, but the staff who have been working on this if you understand the backstory with this, there has been an issue previously with the proportion of the Māori Outcomes Fund that's been able to be gotten out the door. It's exceeded 80% this year, and in terms of the Marae Development Support Area, 99% completion against the budget and work program there. So just a bit of credit there. Better value projects, we had an acknowledgement this week of the work in that space. We've now in the last year progressed a third of all projects in the organisation through that methodology, with obviously a priority on the more costly, the more significant of those projects, and that's going to continue building. And we're getting ready to apply that methodology fairly fulsomely in the transport space with the changes that take effect shortly. Which leads me to the transport reform. We are on track for 1 October in terms of implementation of the changed arrangements. Last week, the new structures, both for the Auckland Council operations and for the new public transport CCO, were announced to staff. That involves, as we've discussed previously, but is now confirmed following staff consultation, the establishment of the Transport and Infrastructure Directorate, the movement of the property function and procurement into finance as a part of a story of strengthening the commercial focus in the organisation. And on the public transport side, there's now clarity about the way that will be organised and set up going forward. There is some work to do in terms of accommodation, future office arrangements. I won't go into that here, but that's a current focus. There's still work going on the setup of the Regional Transport Committee. So at the governance end, we've got this new creation where government appointees and council appointees join together for the stewardship long-term of the transport agenda in Auckland. Central government has still not confirmed its appointees, and the jointly agreed chair of the Regional Transport Committee is still not confirmed. So I have to say, and we have expressed to central government a bit of nervousness about this, given we're very close to 1 October and given work really needs to start picking up now in terms of the 30-year transport plan. The final point I wanted to make, just so you have a sense of what this means at a people level, there are essentially 186 roles that are being disestablished out of this transport reform, but there are quite a number of new roles being created. That reflects the fact of people needing to work in a different environment, both on the public transport side and on this side. So 186 roles, consequently a reasonably significant number of people directly affected this in terms of having their roles disestablished, but there are about 170 new roles. We are managing this in terms of vacancies and what have you to both minimise redundancy compensation costs, ensure that contractually and morally we're looking after people in terms of redeployment opportunities and so on. But we're at that pointy end of the process now. So any vacancies that have been created through this churn are currently live in the organisation now to be filled, with a view to having it as organised and going as it can be for 1 October. Your Worship, I will leave my bit there and just pass to Ross to make a few comments, please.
Sure. Good afternoon, councillors. So, financial results for the year to 30 June will be reported through the Budget and Performance Committee on the 18th of August. The results for the last financial year, the trends remain as they have throughout the year, reasonably strong. 87% CapEx delivery, so 3.7 billion of CapEx delivered across the group over that period. OPEX about 2% favourable to budget, and revenue 6% favourable across the group. So continuation of those trends. As I said, we'll go to Budget and Performance Committee, and then the annual results will travel through Audit and Risk Committee, through the governing body, and out to the world through the annual report process. Phil's talked about the savings work that's underway for the current year. So all looking very challenging. So 106 million target. We've got that 50 million backed in from prior years, but the 55 million additional target, quite challenging. As Phil said, we've allocated that out to departments, varying percentages based off, more to back office functions, less to frontline functions. We're now in the process of starting to gather up and see an early view of what that looks like, so that we can then bring that forward to elected members, with the first touch point being the Value for Money Committee next month. Because of all of the previous savings efforts, a lot of discretionary budgets, the easy levers are gone, so it becomes quite confronting. Some parts of the organisation have only sort of staff costs there, so it's kind of looking, how do we do more with, how do we achieve the results to get with less staff levels? So that might be managing through vacancies and attrition, but it does mean spreading work further or stopping doing some work. Some of that relates to taking less, taking a bit more risk. Other areas that where all of their work is community facing, some of the conversation has to move to how do we find savings? It's not about finding savings without impacting community, it's what's the least impact in terms of those savings. So lots of hard discussions. It's pleasing that everyone's taken on the challenge. There's a good response. They've heard the direction from yourselves through the annual budget process. Aucklanders are doing it tough, and we need to do what we can, but we're kind of really into that hard choices space. But we will give you full visibility of that, particularly where things hit community, hit service levels through that elected member process. So that, in addition, I guess, to the 106 million savings challenge we've got, there are risks around fuel costs. So if you recall, in the annual budget process, we talked about, we thought there'd be a fuel cost impact of between 25 to 50 million this financial year. In the budget, we've solved for 25 million of that, and then we said we'd take a monitoring approach, we'd monitor trends, and then we might need to come back to you for additional action, response and mitigations if things are a bit higher. At this point in the process, we've been pushing back hard where people have come to us to vary contracts for fuel escalation, so we've tried to manage, we've pushed back on a lot of things, but there are these contracts that have escalation clauses built into it. We've managed to pay out some of those escalated contracts where people have a right, they've got a contractual right to force us to pay more because of higher fuel prices. Some of that has been paid in the last financial year, about 7 million of cost. So that's hit the previous financial year, and we can cover that with favourable results there. But the current estimates are $37 million. These estimates will change and vary, it'll go up and go down, but we're looking at the moment about a $10 to $12 million extra fuel cost budget hit over and above what we've got budgeted. We'll have to keep monitoring that, but if all else fails, then that's an extra 106 million will have to increase by 10 to 12 million, makes that challenge even harder. Where fuel prices go from here, who knows? It's a very dynamic global situation. We'll keep you updated on that as we progress through the year. Then looking ahead to next financial year, the key shifts there, the key things that we're concerned about is the inflation rate. So the inflation rate is tracking higher than expected. Interest rates are higher as well as a consequence. and we are starting to see through some of the procurement activity, so where new contracts are coming through, where we're going to market, getting pricing, we are starting to see the impact of the higher inflation environment come through to those challenges. So looking ahead to next financial year, the first year of the LTP, before we even start to think about any new investment, we've got this 106 million challenge, and then we've got inflationary interest costs that pressure is starting to build. So that could well be another 100 million, 150 million. We'll give you more information on those numbers and predictions as we move forward. But it's a challenging environment that we're heading into. So that's kind of how the financial picture is looking. We'll keep giving you monthly updates through this forum and through the Value for Money Committee. Thank you.
Very happy to take questions.
As yet, I have no questions, so... Oh, sorry, Councillor Fletcher, I missed you. My apologies.
Thank you, Phil, for your update to us. And this question is one just in terms of the preparedness with rates notices going out this week for those that want assistance. Can you just talk to, or maybe, I'm not sure who I should direct the question to, what level of preparedness you have with staff for inquiries that will be coming in from council, to council from residents?
I'll get Ross to add to this. Suffice to say, we're very conscious of that. The call centre and customer folk are well prepped for that cycle and those inquiries. And obviously aware of some of the specific support tools that are available to assist in that regard. But Ross?
That's correct. So we need to, we're very aware of that. As Phil said, the call centre's on notice. They're prepared for an increase in volume as people call through. We have a range of support options available, including pointing people to the government rebate scheme, the postponement scheme, and payment plans, all those kind of things. There is a bit of effort that's gone to the common side of things. There's material on our Auckland, and there are some explainer videos. I understand some information's been sent out to councillors around some FAQs and pointing in that right direction. We can circulate that again, so that if you're getting queries, you can point people to the right information and direct them to the right place.
Thank you.
Councillor Patterson-Hamlin, please.
Thank you. In terms of, first of all, congrats, I guess, for 186 roles changing, but only 10 or so human beings being potentially let go, and that's reducing the human cost to that extent is impressive, and grateful for the work in that space. My question is about, not unrelated probably, about the AI-led interactions and potentially increasing that. Are we kind of comfortable at the moment with our security in terms of how that's performed so far, and what security measures are we planning on putting in place with any expansion of the use of AI?
Yes, thanks for that. First of all, declaring not a huge amount of technical expertise in this space, so I look to others for some assurance. While you might be aware that as part of this change process, by the way, that I've made some changes to the way that shared services will operate in the future. Obviously, there's a very material change in the CCO landscape, so we're going to operate that slightly differently. But one of the things that we are doing, for the time being at least, is keeping the sort of quasi-board that we put in place there in place to sort of help govern some of those back office technology investment areas and what have you. And they've been turning their mind to the cyber security aspect. We've recently invested in some technology to strengthen us, and so there is reasonable levels of assurance around our cyber security arrangements. In terms of AI and new technologies more generally, we've got people doing work on both the security aspects of that, but also importantly, well, what's the opportunity there and what will the investment look like? One of the areas that you've called for a body of advice on through the long-term plan is that technology investment. So perhaps I might leave it till we are having that conversation a little bit later in the year. Suffice to say that there is both an opportunity but also a cost in the short term in terms of investment to move the organisation towards a more advanced state, really, in terms of its use of technology tools and so on. So, I think we might leave that for a conversation in the context of LTP investment in due course. I might just comment, if I might. I didn't go into a lot of detail with this. There are somewhere just short of $2.5 million worth of direct savings coming out of the transport reform. Some of that is people related, that small number of roles, the difference between the previous arrangement and this one. I have to say I think, wisely trying to be a little bit cautious around this. I really want to get the, that part of the Auckland transport operation that's coming to council. I want to get it in and really understand it before we start over-promising in terms of whether there are efficiencies and cost savings there. We've got to have that experience of it operating the organisation before we start doing too much surgery. So there's a lot of bring it in, make some level of change now, but learn how to operate it and get some first-hand experience. And I've said this sort of semi-publicly in terms of presentations to the staff. I'm a little bit surprised at the size of the public transport enterprise. It's slightly bigger than I originally envisaged through this, but there's a degree of sort of familiarity or ignorance in what I might have originally thought the size of that enterprise might be. But there's a context that's important. Obviously, public transport usage is going up. We're dealing with growth dynamics and increasing services in the City Rail Link coming online and a number of other stations with customer service aspects and what have you. So it's a very dynamic area, and I think it would be unwise to it would have been unwise to go too hard through this simple structural change process in terms of trying to pull cost out now, but we'll be focusing on it through the course of the year.
Thank you, Phil. I'm hoping that the standardisation will save money on consultants rather than staff. There's rather too many other people eating our lunch as well as the staff. There is, Your Worship, there is a body of work around that, and that's quite possible. I think some of that will have a bearing on the capital program and what we can get out of it in terms of number of projects done as well. I've got a question, and then Mr. Hills will follow up. But would you be able to talk to us about some of the fast track issues we've been facing? I've had a number of mayors talk to me after an LG and Z meeting I agreed to speak at on the proviso they didn't try and make me join, but I know I've unearthed the Mayor of Queenstown's really highly annoyed about the process, as are others, particularly because a lot of the fast track, they don't actually ask them to do things fast. There's no time. And so if you're going to have fast track and you say whether you're going to be building within 6 weeks, that makes sense to me. But if you're allowed to wait for years before you get around to doing it, then a whole lot of these highly undesirable greenfields things are coming in, the most notable being, what's it called? Grenmore, something or other, with trucking the sewage to Whangarei didn't struck me as particularly clever or a step forward. So just let us Give us your thoughts on that and where you're going there.
Well, of course, this is a process not of our making. That both, I think our experience reflects what I'm hearing from colleagues, other chief executives around the country, and there are two sides to this coin. There are positive stories, where infrastructure and other projects are being enabled through this process to get off the ground more quickly and with more certainty and what have you. And, there's positive sentiment around that. Conversely, as we're experiencing, there are projects, residential projects, for example, around the periphery of the city, as you know, that represent sort of out of cycle things that have consequences for us in terms of infrastructure and so forth. So there are a number, others around the country share a degree of concern about what it's enabling. In that regard, there are some practical sides to this. I mean, it's putting there are quite a number of these, and they're putting additional pressure on our planning and other folk who are required to prepare inputs in a very short timeline. So there are resource implications for us that we're coping with, but under some degree of pressure in terms of just getting responses out in the required time frame on them, which is part of the process, of course. I personally think there are some fairly interesting, shall I say, outcomes coming out of that process, such as one that you're aware of to the north of Auckland, CBD.
Okay, I've got Councillors Hills, Sayers, Watson, and then hopefully lunch. Okay.
Thanks, Mayor. And yeah, I was going to ask a similar question. I will ask a further question on Fast Track Phil, and I am working with the Mayor's office and Megan on response or further actions. But is there any discussion you've had with other CEs around just downing tools, like we just refuse to do any work on fast tracks, not process them, or is that you just couldn't do that legally?
Well, we can't do no, not really. I'm aware of a little bit of that sentiment, but not seriously as a proposition from other councils. I would regard that definitely as a political, requiring to be politically led rather than officials. We will continue professionally to respond and as we are required to by the legislation.
Thank you. And just another thing, and it is the cost of the planning changes next year. Were you aware, or is the staff or team, maybe Megan, I haven't had a chance to talk to her, but about the regulatory relief? So we submitted against that point, but we got told at the time that it probably wouldn't be retrospective. And I'll give one example. The SEAs that have been in place for decades, what we're hearing is that we will have to reassess all of those before we can even do a new plan change, and we could end up having to pay 24,000 people between $7 million and $2 billion is the independent assessment of that under rates capping. Are we doing a bit of deep dive on what that actually means for us, Megan?
Yeah, thanks to the chair. Look, we are. We've just started to understand what the report back to the committee says. So those bills, and assuming that then rolls through into the final act. So we're kind of in the early stages of trying to understand what that means. But we were always really concerned with it. We said that in our submission. You said that in your submission, and we still are now. So we will need to come back to you with some greater advice and understanding once we get that.
I'm wondering if was there any way urgently you could talk to officials, even if it was just going forward, a new requirement putting on, but requiring, I assume houses and properties were bought at a lower price if you had a SEA on your property for 20 years saying you can't build on this stream and forest, and now like, I don't know, it just seems.
Could have been the case. Look, I'm happy to talk to officials. Yep,
Outrageous.
thanks.
And maybe a question for Ross. So can I have that clear again? Of the 106, you've locked in 50, you believe. So you've got 56 million still to find, then likely another 10 million on top of that for the fuel.
Yes, that's the current situation. Yep.
Yep.
And
Plus whatever else we feel we need to do during the course of the year to get us in the best financial position we can be in going into the long-term plan, given the I would suggest reasonably shared aspiration here to stick with that indicative 3.5%, which is under pressure already. So, you know, the story's not finished in terms of the short-term plans around that 106 million.
yeah, that 3.5 was predicated on 2% inflation, and we're at 4, so that'll be interesting. But so the 66 million you're trying to find, Phil and Ross, will you have to come back to us if there are drastic decisions, like if you've still got 66 million and not, like how is this affecting staff and projects and plans, or are you just going to have to quickly pull a handbrake on some stuff?
Couple of points. We are going to report to you anyway for transparency around the decisions that need to sit behind that 106 million. We most certainly need to report to you where there are potentially service level impacts, again for transparency, but also because those are your decisions, not mine. Okay, but we need to be transparent around any impacts like that. You know, as the financial year progresses, and if we are not confident about meeting those savings targets, then other things need to be done during the course of the year. Not filling vacancies, slowing down the expenditure run rate to ensure that the end of year position is sound. And again, that's something we just need to progressively report on during the course of the year to you. So you should have pretty fulsome visibility of what's happening in that regard.
Cool. And last question, just on staff wellbeing, just with the, you know, it's a massive change, the transport reform, and there's other parts of the organisation who maybe thought they weren't affected and now are, and that may not mean they're losing a job, it might mean they're changing. How much, I know you're meeting with them and doing teams and stuff often, but how much additional support around that are staff getting on the transition to make sure they're okay, but also that the bones of the organisation continue as well as possible?
Well, there's not a lot of new stuff in that regard. We've got good support structures in place, mechanisms and so on, career guidance, other personal supports and what have you. I haven't got any recent stats in terms of whether the demand's going up by virtue of this. I have to say, I think the staff are in pretty good shape, including folk at Auckland Transport. The most important thing for them that I've repeatedly been told is that they want clarity and certainty about what the future looks like, and very positively we're now in a position to kind of largely give them that. So, and you know, it might be just opportune just to pause and thank all of those people, particularly folk affected in Auckland Transport. They've been highly professional and engaged, and the performance of AT has demonstrably been quite positive in terms of the capital program and other KPIs. So there's a lot to be pretty pleased with actually in terms of things not coming off the rails. Yeah.
Thank you. Could I have Councillor Sayers, please?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Just two questions around the AT reform exercise. One, you mentioned about the standardisation, and I'm not sure you said there was some work being done. So when might we get some visibility on, you know, what's planned to be standardised and, you know, what's happening inside that work program? The other question is around listening to this morning's discussions about the delegations and the roads, etc., in terms of the width of decision-making that, if that's the right way to term it, the width of decision-making that perhaps existed for staff within Auckland Transport versus what you're going to propose them coming into Auckland Council, are those spans of control or decision-making going to be the same, wider or tighter, just relative to where staff's delegations have been traditionally with Auckland Transport?
Look, I don't say this to sort of open up or relitigate anything from that last item, but there are some very material changes in the staff delegation space represented here. Some of the stuff that was previously going to the Transport Control Committee, I might not have the terminology there, that ceases to exist, and there's a whole body of stuff that sits with elected members going forward. There are pretty significant changes between the future operating model in that regard and what previously existed. I won't get into too much of a commentary about the Auckland Transport structure. Suffice to say that through this process, we've had a look at things like spans of controls and reporting arrangements and what have you. There were, relative to the size of the organisation in AT, it was more top-heavy and more layered than typically what is represented in the new structure and on the Auckland Council side, and likewise the public transport side. To the first element of your question.
Sorry, Phil, if I could ask that, just related to your answer there before you move on. One of the primary reasons I'm asking that is in terms of elected members, whether they be councillors or local board members or Kura members, the speed at which they can get responses back in terms of queries. So that was one of the kind of additional reasons behind my question, just to understand, will our service levels to us be better, faster, or otherwise?
I think they will be at least as good, if not better. I do want to acknowledge that empirically, if you have a look at the feedback from local boards about Auckland Transport in recent times, there had been a significant improvement in quite a positive way in terms of the sentiment around that level of immediate support from Auckland Transport. So that's a good starting point to kind of preserve in this, and we've absolutely done that in terms of the dedicated roles that are there for elected member liaison and response reasons. That's been protected and enhanced because of that decision making in the new structure. I might just pause and get Steve to comment, because this is going to be his new baby.
Thank you, Councillor. Just talk about standardisation.
Yeah.
So just refer to the first point of your question, Councillor, about the standardisation. Look, there's a number of activities that we're not waiting till the 1st of October, which is the go-live date, to start doing things quite differently, and looking at our standard designs is one of them. So Auckland Transport does have standard designs. We're currently going through and looking at all those designs from a fit for purpose or value for money perspective. We're then comparing that with the standard designs that we have within Auckland Council, and then looking and comparing the two to make sure that they integrate with each other. I think one of the things that we're finding is the adherence to using the standard designs during construction. That's a bit of a concern. So we're looking at the process and education around how Auckland Transport staff and how third-party staff use those designs to implement value for money projects in the field. So it's work in progress. It's progressing really well, but we'll be in a good position by the 1st of October around that whole design standardisation, and also utilising the in-house design resources that we do have available to us.
And Steve, are we likely to get a debrief on where we've landed with all that work?
Yeah, absolutely, more than happy to do a debrief on any topic that the councillors would like to understand more on.
Finally, just the Mayor alluded to a little bit earlier, a hope or expectation that by doing the standardisation, there might be savings, external savings from consultancy input. Do you see that as a reality?
Yeah, I think where the real benefit is to really understand the scope of the project before we commit to it, that we're actually delivering projects that the community really value, and it's about making sure that we deliver the right form and function, and we have the scope well defined before we go to construction. I think that's where the biggest benefit is in terms of making savings.
Okay, and if I may ask this question, Steve, it's not my area of expertise, but it's often been commented about scope creep, you know, as it goes through so many hands, it all gets kind of gold-plated, for want of a better word. So the exercise that you've just explained to us that the organisation's going through right now, do you see that being, what are the controls about limiting that scope creep?
Scope creep's quite different to having the scope right at the first place. So our focus is about making sure that we have the scope right before we commit, even to tendering work, as an example. So we are delivering the right project at the right time in the right place. We do have controls in place during project execution to make sure that we control scope, which is scope creep, to make sure that we don't just keep adding new things to the project as the project progresses on site. So, to me, it's about spending the time getting things right up front, because that's where we can go out to market, do our procurement on a very defined scope that that our communities see, value and trust.
I think I might just comment as well that as a basic rule of thumb here, if it's more cost effective to do some of that scoping, commissioning, design work in-house, preferably on the basis of some standardised designs wherever possible, then that's what we should do. My instinct is that there probably is consulting cost in here that can be pulled back through that thinking. It's been obscured, I think, slightly by the fact that some of that work is capitalised in projects rather than observable in the operating side of the business. So it is an area for ongoing look, and I'm really pleased that Steve's picked it up and has a dedicated work stream around it.
Yeah, very good. I'm pleased as well, so thank you.
Me too. Councillor Watson, please.
Following on from Councillor Fletcher's questions to do with the rates demands that I understand go out this week, certainly my experience when there was revaluations was that a lot of people, if not all of them, got caught by surprise, and there was quite a lot of contact with certainly the elected members. In this case, we have a record rate increase that's going out, and I just want to know what the accessibility is of people to draw some comparisons with their rates from previous years. Obviously, if you keep a paper copy, then you can go back and look. And I bring this up because I had a query yesterday from a guy who wanted to compare his rates now to what they were in 2022-23. And as it turned out, his property was roughly the average. So I knew what the average was from looking at some of the old annual plans I had, and in his case it had gone up over $1,500 since 2022-23. So I was able to give him an answer. But for other people who want to go back a few years rather than just last year, are they able to access their rate demands online, or do they require a digital copy, I guess they could go back and look through their bills, but is there any easy, straightforward way through the council website that they can compare their rates increases over a number of years?
I'm not sure what is readily available. Obviously, if they contact council through the call centre, we can find information. We might just have to, look at what is online, what we can make available, where we can point people to, and come back to you. I can't answer off the top of my head what is available.
So I certainly know technological wizard, Ross, but as it stands, it appears to me as you can just access your current account, your current demand. So if there is a way that people can get back, maybe not back to the beginning of the world, but back 3 or 4 years, I think that would be helpful in people being able to track how their rates have changed over time, because obviously the more your rates increase goes up, consequently then the greater the impact of a rates increase, because you're at a higher level. So I'm just signalling I detect a lot of interest in this, and I suspect if last time was anything to go by, there will be a lot of inquiries.
We'll have a look and see what's possible. It might be that if people use the My Auckland portal, they can see their rates. There might be a history through that channel, but we'll have a look and see what is available or can be made available.
Thank you for that. Councillor Williamson, please.
Yeah, this is probably not going to be that popular, but I just want to go through a question about the AT and merging it back into the council. There's some really good examples in operations both in New Zealand and around the world, and some really good examples in New Zealand of transport operations where a cataclysmic or a catastrophic change had to be made to the way it was structured and functioned. And at the end of it, a huge number of staff were found to have been part of a inflated bureaucracy of inefficiencies. So in fact, in the mid-1980s, the Labour government got in and deregulated Kiwi Rail, or New Zealand Rail. Total staff, 25,000. They paid out nearly $500 million in redundancies and brought the staff to 5,000 and carried more freight each year from that point on. I was part of a merger of Air New Zealand and NAC, about 4,500 Air New Zealand staff, 5,500 NAC, 10,000 merged into one new airline. And of that 10,000, 2,500 were made redundant that year. And there's plenty of examples in terms of British Airways. So my question comes back to you, when you've got the opportunity to make a radical, complete redo of an organisation and sharpen its focus and get rid of the inefficiencies and take any of the fat and surplus that normally accumulates in any organisation over time, you're telling us there was 17 people difference? And I just can't understand why we haven't been able to make a far more significant improved service, as has been elsewhere. As I said, I think British Airways British Rail took 110,000 staff out and started carrying more people and freight. So I guess my question simply comes down to you, how much thought did you get to really honing out some massive efficiency gains and reduction of bureaucracy and duplication and quadruplication that just necessarily by osmosis creeps into a big organisation over the time, as opposed to what looks like just a lift and shift?
It's a fair question. We have not done a full surgical look at Auckland Transport in terms of efficiency. That is, I acknowledge that. Recognising it's going into two parts, and there has been an element of that responsibility properly sitting with the interim board and in terms of the future public transport design as well. But for that part of it that's coming to council, we have not done that work yet, other than to ensure in the design of the structure that that as a starting point it makes sense and we can carry on with the transport functions that are coming our way. Now that does not mean that, you know, and there was clearly a possibility that we could do that through this exercise, but the time frame didn't really allow it. Okay, because, you know, this all needs to be done by 1 October. Now, that might sound like a bit of a cop-out, but it is the reality of the situation. We have, however, in the last year, built up quite a significant number of vacancies, I think prudently, because we wanted to mitigate the possibility of redundancy compensation costs and the effects on people. And there is a question remaining about the extent to which we will fill all of those going forward. So both Stacey van der Putten and I, from a leadership point of view, need to look more closely at those structures on an ongoing basis to see what the opportunity is there. Yeah, but I you know, and I appreciate it might sound like a bit of a cop-out, but in terms of priorities, the key strategic priority is around the democratic decision making and the shifting of the function in, and there is an element of kind of lift and shift involved in that. Some change certainly, but not wholesale to the point that it, you know, in a different environment you might have done something a little bit more.
Phil, I can almost live with that and lie abed at night sort of calmly, as long as I know that after it's all in place and functioning, a real sort of root and branch analysis of what are the roles and functions, how many do we have relative to an organisation that's similar to us, and benchmarking, and that if we do actually have a massive duplication or quadruplication of roles and functions and tiers and so on, we begin a process of then making sure we downsize to what is a realistic, efficient operation. Because my real fear in an organisation like this, if you just do the lift and shift, from Monday onwards, we just carry on as we were. And I don't want that to happen.
Just final point. So I don't mean to say that there hasn't been some scrutiny in that regard. For example, you know, and you might be familiar how this normally unfolds in a lot of organisations. You know, you have a look at the management hierarchy, the number of direct reports, the spans of control, you know, focusing on that sort of middle management layer. So some of that has absolutely happened in terms of the setup of the new reporting arrangements.
Okay.
Julie, lunch.
Subtle, Mr. Mayor. I actually have one short question, which I know is unusual. Development levies. We had an indication from central government that they were bringing new legislation to change the development contribution system. We still don't have that, as far as I'm aware, and the clock's starting to tick very loudly on that. Do you have any indication yet of when we might hear something, and how are we preparing for that? Because we'll need to have that in the mayoral proposal, really. Thanks.
I haven't had any recent updates. There was some policy and draft legislation, so bits of it released many months ago. Since then, it's all gone a bit quiet, so we're still waiting to hear from timelines. I don't know whether Phil or Megan's got any further updates around timelines, but at the moment it's all very quiet from what I can see.
Is it coming up in the regional deal conversations, the city deal?
It is in terms of needing more tools around this stuff, and the government's saying that they're going to provide the tools, and we're saying we haven't got them yet. So we're not sure that it will come out prior to the election anymore. So there certainly won't be any decisions made. I guess there's a slight chance that you might get a bill introduced, but I'm not even sure that's going to happen now.
So I think it will be useful for us in the long-term plan conversation to understand what that means, because earlier the indication was that we would have to have development levies in place as a system for the next long-term plan. That sounds to me like we won't be able to do that.
No, I don't believe we can, no. I don't think the legislation will be through by then anyway,
Okay,
even if we had to.
yeah, okay. That has quite serious implications for the long-term plan budgeting then. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, the change of name from development contributions to development levies has been foreclosed, but the numbers, and it's the numbers which make a difference. And so, as a person who pays them, the numbers is quite important. Anyhow, talking of numbers, we're going to reconvene at 2:10. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, we've got to vote and say we receive the report. All those in favour of receiving the report? And I've moved and seconded it by Abe Baker. All those in favour of receiving it, and pay aye, please. Contrary, thank you very much. Now you can go and receive a sandwich.